Hello, BookTube. Well. Okay, we are we are convened here to do a read along of Thomas Covenant, but we just had a tiny bit of fireworks here in Hyde Cottage, so I'm having a little bit of trouble adjusting. My little schnauzer Frida was on the couch on the other side of this room, just sort of lounging. She was awake. But she was just sort of lounging. She was looking at me. It's a miserable, dark, pouring rain, cold day, so she doesn't want to be moving around and she doesn't want to be outside. And she was just sort of lounging there. She tends to watch me in benign incomprehension while I'm making these videos. And then suddenly, she was gone from the couch, and it was like you were looking at a film footage and a frame was cut out. It happened that fast. Suddenly, she was entirely across the room, killing a mouse that I hadn't even seen. A mouse on this corner here. Suddenly, she was across the room. That's a good 15 feet. Faster than I have ever seen any breed of dog move for any reason whatsoever. And this is not the first time I've seen it. I remember the first time when she was just barely not a puppy anymore. She had her new teeth. She had her adult teeth, but I had never seen it. I'd never seen her do that before. I've never seen a dog move so fast. Everything changed completely. Suddenly she was across the room. The mouse never had a chance. Never had a chance. As far as I can tell from examining the corpse, first she broke its back, and then she gently but very firmly crushed its skull. And then she presented the corpse to me. And there was nothing about it that was normal Frida. I know Frida and all of her moods and all of her activities and all of her weird obsessions, but that was just breeding, just taking over, just completely taking. That was instinct, just completely taking over, making her into a killing machine, and then stopping her back down to her normal personality. Amazing, amazing, and chilling. so it's thrown me off my pins for just a bit. But we're gonna get back. We're gonna get back to our read along, because we are finishing up a book today. We're doing a read along. I'm doing a read along with a bunch of other booktubers of the first 6 books in the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant the Unbeliever by Stephen R. Donaldson. So there are 2 trilogies: the first Chronicles of Thomas Covenant the Unbeliever, the Lord Fowl's Bane, the Earth War, and the Power That Preserves. We read those over the summer. I've read them many, many times. I've read especially the Earth War many, many times and really enjoyed it. It was a great amount of fun to read those things with new eyes, as it were, because I have a new audience, because I have new people reading along. And then we moved into the second trilogy, second Chronicles of Thomas Covenant the Unbeliever, a radically different set of books. I knew that because I've read them a couple of times years and years ago. Rereading them now for this read along, I'm realizing how radically different they are in a few different ways. Some are very obvious. The setting. In the first book, The Wounded Land, the setting is the land, this fantasy land where our hero Thomas Covenant goes when he leaves our world. But after it's a radically changed land. It's not anything like the land in the first trilogy. But after that first book, we leave even that behind. We go to completely new places. So on the very outward level, these are very different books. But they're also very different in other ways too. For instance, Thomas Covenant himself is different. He's not the irredeemable a-hole that he is in the first trilogy. Instead, he's different in these books. He seems to have a more of an ideological core to his being. He seems to care more about things outside of himself. He seems less of a droning, repeating, self-absorbed git than he did in the first 3 books. And part of that is because he has a human foil. In the second trilogy, he goes to the land with another human from our world, a doctor named Lyndon Avery, who is a damaged person in her own right. She has personal psychological baggage from the death of her parents, and also conflicted feelings about Covenant that come to fruition, as it were, in the chapters that we're reading today. Today we're finishing up the second book in the second trilogy, The One Tree, and it's a clean break. By random chance, it's a clean break. The major what happens next, fantasy plotline of this book wrapped up neatly at the end of the chapters that we read last time. Our travelers, there's Thomas Covenant, there's Lyndon Avery, there's a weird being named Vane who is entirely black and seems impervious to harm and doesn't speak and seems to have his own agenda. There's an emissary from the Elohim, these ethereal shape-changing beings who are the personification of earth power. And there's also giants. Where our hero, all of our crew are traveling on a giant ship, crewed and led by giants who are a wonderful, wonderful creations. They're just the search, the giant mission is led by a giant woman in chainmail with a sword who has a soft side and a complex side. Her husband is hunchbacked and deformed, a rarity among giants. There's a giant who has been rendered mute by his visions of earth power and by his visions of the future. And in addition to all of that, there are also members of the Harukai, a people of the land who, in the first trilogy, a contingent of 500 of them go to Lord Kevin in the very beginning of the Lords of the Land, long before we see Thomas Covenant, long before the events in Lord Foulsbane, and offer up their service to the Lords. They have been impressed by the fidelity of the Lords and the love of their love for the land. So these 500 Harukai come from their mountain fastness and offer up their loyalty, their service to the Lords. And they offer it in such an extravagant way, binding it with earth power, that they take a vow with a capital V that renders them immune to aging and beyond the need of food or drink or even sleep. And they become the Blood Guard in those books. An amazing creation that I think is we get its best rendition in the second book, in the Ill-Earth War. And this is the second book of this trilogy, and I've noticed there are a lot of parallels in this second trilogy to the first trilogy in very broad senses. I think that the first book in the first trilogy, Lord Foulsbane, is a bit of a slog. And I think, even after rereading for this read-along, this first book in this trilogy, The Wounded Land, is also a bit of a slog. And the Ill-Earth War is my favorite of the first trilogy, largely because of its concentration on plot and its concentration on the Harukai, on the Blood Guard. We get not only depictions of individual Blood Guards telling stories about all the things that happen, but we also get a massive revelation at the end of that book that affects the Blood Guard directly. A confrontation between Covenant and the two Blood Guard who are with him at the end of that book is purely verbal. There's no wielding. Covenant wields a white gold wedding ring that allows him to manipulate wild magic, chaos magic. There's none of that. It's just words that Covenant uses, but they're devastating enough in their long-term effect. And the same thing is true in this book. We have, even after we've left the main plot line in the middle of the book behind, this tyrannical desert kingdom, we leave that kingdom behind here as our heroes escape and go on with their quest. But even once we leave that, this is still a very plot-girded book, and I like that. I think it plays to Donaldson's strength. Our heroes have left the Sandhold behind. They have managed to escape, but they still have a quest, and that quest is Thomas Covenant's idea to find the one tree, the source of this thing that grows directly out of earth power, and from one of its branches fashion a new staff of law, which had been lost in the original trilogy, that helps to shore up the natural laws, the natural health of the land. Covenant is thinking that if he can make a new staff of law, he can help to alleviate the ransacked corruption that we all saw in the Wounded Land. So the quest is to find the one tree, and somehow use the magic of his ring, which he seems to be able to control a lot more precisely in these books than he could in the first trilogy, to shape a new staff of law. That is still the quest, and our band of heroes is still on that quest. However, in the chapters that we're reading today, we're finishing up the book today, there's aftermath from some of the events that happened in the end of the last chapters, and it specifically involves the Harukai. Because there's one point where Lyndon Avery seems willing to kill one of the Harukai in order to facilitate the escape of everybody else. I'm being general here to avoid giving spoilers if you haven't gotten this far. But when we open these chapters at the beginning of the section that we're reading today, the other Harukai want her to suffer for it. They want what they call retribution. They want some sort of punishment. for the fact that she has always seemed to be the hand of corruption among them. It seems to the other Harukai like she shouldn't be trusted by anybody, like she shouldn't be part of this mission. And one of these Harukai reads the Riot Act to all the others, gives out all of their reasons why they don't trust Lyndon Avery. And when they're done, and the question is sort of implicitly being put to Thomas Covenant, not only because the quest is in his name, but because he has this incredible amount of power. He has this ring that can erupt in energy. It makes him a godlike figure in a way that I think would have presented a real narrative problem to a younger Stephen Donaldson. I think he handles it quite well in this book and especially the next book. But it isn't Covenant who snaps back when the Harukai did this. Instead, it's Lyndon Avery. And I have to read it to you because this is also a parallel with the first trilogy. What would the middle book of a Thomas Covenant trilogy be without someone reading the Riot Act to the Harukai? I think it's great, and it's eerie that it's very similar in some ways to the verbal confrontation that Covenant has with Banner of the Bloodguard in the Ill-Earth War. So I wanted to read it to you. But first, I want to set up the story. This is Bryn of the Harukai, who is giving the summation to everybody else of why they don't trust Lyndon Avery. He says, "Hear me. Among our people, the old tellers speak often of the Bloodguard who served the former lords of the land, and of Kevin Landwaster, who wrought the ritual of desecration. In that mad act, the old lords met their end, for they were undone by the desecration. But so also should the Bloodguard have ended. Had they not taken their vow to preserve the lords or die? Yet they endured, for Kevin Landwaster had sent them from him ere he undertook the ritual. They had obeyed, not knowing what lay in his heart. From that obedience came doubt among the Bloodguard, and with doubt the door to corruption was opened. The failure of the Bloodguard was that they did not judge Kevin Landwaster, or did not judge him rightly. Therefore corruption had its way with the old lords and with the Bloodguard, and the new lords would have likewise fallen had not the Earl Lord accepted upon himself the burden of the land. Now I say to you, we will not err in that way again. The purity of any service lies in those who serve, not in that which they serve, and we will not corrupt ourselves by trust of that which is false." Essentially, Bryn is saying it's her or us. We don't trust her, and we're not going to serve blindly anymore. And you think that it'll be Covenant who gives a caustic response, but instead it's Lyndon Avery. It's wonderful. I want to read it to you. I beg your indulgence here. Did you ever ask yourself why Kevin Landwaster chose the ritual of desecration? She was shivering in the marrow of her bones. He must have been an admirable man, or at least powerful. If the Bloodguard were willing to give up death and even sleep to serve him, so what happened to him? She saw that Covenant might try to answer, but she didn't let him. I'll tell you, the goddamn Bloodguard happened to him. It wasn't bad enough that he was failing, that he couldn't save the land himself. He had to put up with them as well. Standing there like God Almighty and serving him while he lost everything he loved. Jesus Christ, no wonder he went crazy with despair. How could he keep any shred of his self-respect with people like them around? He must have thought he didn't have any choice except to destroy everything that wasn't worthy of them. She says, where is it here? Now you're going to do the same thing. You've got all the power in the world, and you're so pure about it. Everything you do is so dedicated. You drive everyone around you to such extremes. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. It's pretty spot on. And it turns out to have much more validity than it seems at the surface, because as the quest moves on, it eventually lands at the island of the One Tree. And it turns out that the One Tree is guarded. And at the last minute, Bryn and the other Harukai on board the ship say that among their people they have an ancient legend that predates the Harukai voyaging to the land and meeting the lords by ever so many millennia. Their oldest myth is of one particular figure, the ultimate Bloodguard, the ultimate Harukai, the ultimate a person so skilled in the kind of unarmed combat that the Harukai excel at that he isn't even visible. And also that he's the summation of the kind of stoic wisdom of the Harukai as well. That he is not so much a god, but a guru, kind of a bodhisattva. And his name is Akaru Kenostin Ardinal. We're told the Bloodguard of the Harukai are terse, short-spoken people, but apparently not in their mythological names, because his name is Akaru Kenostin Ardinal. And sure enough, it turns out that Akaru Kenostin Ardinal is guarding the one tree. And Bryn of the Harukai engages in combat with him. And it's a wonderful scene, because Bryn can't see what he's fighting, except that as the fight goes on, the more wounds, the more cuts and bruises he delivers to his enemy, the more visible his enemy becomes. And turns out, once he's fully visible, that his enemy is an old, wizened Harukai. And in defeating that figure, Bryn becomes that figure. Again, it's an explicit parallel with the end of the Illyrth War, where Heil Troy becomes a Forrestal, where suddenly all that he had planned for his own future is fused with this much older tradition. It's an explicit parallel with that, and that seems to be a cause for joy. The other Harukai are as happy as we can ever see them, but the book ends. This middle book ends with the quest apparently failing. The island falls apart. The island literally falls apart. It erupts underneath them. They barely escape with their lives, and everything in it sinks below the water. And it looks like that the quest to forge a new staff of law will not happen, will not come to be. And that's how we end this book. So from this, we are moving on to White Goldwielder. White Goldwielder is the third and final book in this series. An incredibly powerful volume. I have really increased my estimation of these books, even The Wounded Land, but especially The One Tree. What a book. What a great combination of personality and character development and high adventure. Just loved it. Absolutely loved it. So glad that I found a hardcover for free. And I found, at the same time that I found this hardcover of The One Tree, I also found a hardcover of the White Goldwielder. But can I find it now? No. I'm sure that it's here somewhere, buried under something. But we're moving on to this next month. And those of you who watched my read-along video about DuneTube will know what I'm going to say next. We're going to change this read-along just a bit for December to finish it out. We're going to finish this out. We're not doing the other Thomas Covenant books that came long after these. We're stopping with the White Goldwielder. And the change that's going to be is that I'm going to revert to the normal read-along model being followed by the other members of this read-along. And we're just going to talk about this book once in the third week of December. I don't know when the date will be exactly, somewhere in that third week, around the 17th or 18th. The video will probably be long. I'll want to talk about details and read you from it and all. But we won't be doing this week by week. I always forget what December is like. In July, I always forget what December is like, and then I remember it at the last minute. So we're going to be doing one. I'm not going to give you chapter counts or anything like that. We're going to be doing one read-along of this book. So if you're doing this read-along and you're following, I would say my advice to you would be finish The One Tree and read The White Goldwielder. Just dive in and read as much of it as you want. Read as much of it as you can. It's a terrific book. Every bit as entertaining as The One Tree. In fact, I'm sure that I am going to end up liking it much more when I reread it. I'm going to dive right into it myself. This reread has been a boon. I'm really grateful that we did it. So I want to hear everything that you thought about The One Tree. And that great moment when the Harukai have been ensorcelled by essentially mermaids on the ocean, and they cannot be woken from their stupor. No one can figure out a way to do it. They're just laying there insensate. And Lyndon Avery figures out the way. She figures out a way that will work on the Harukai that might not have worked on anybody else. She takes Bryn's arm and leans it over the edge of a table, and then calmly whispers in his ear, "I'm now going to break your arm." And that snaps him out of it. That snaps him out of it real quick. But we're going to move on to this book for December. But we're not going to be meeting every week. We're just going to meet once to talk about the whole thing. And then we'll be done with this read-along. So I'm going to wrap this up for now. But we'll reconvene in a few weeks and talk about White Goldwielder. So get to work on it. Thank you, BookTube.